Hello friends, welcome back to the revision lectures on GST and customs for CA final May 20 attempt. There was a short gap in recording because of this corona effect, and even now we are in a lockdown situation. But I just wanted to reach you, so therefore I am doing some recording from my house itself. So please don't look into the background. So all these are the scribbles, etc., done by my kids. So therefore, kindly bear with this particular video quality, and may not be the studio quality, but kindly bear with me. In the last video, we have completed up to valuation, that is revision to valuation, and now we are proceeding with revision 3, that is time of supply. And let's proceed into that. So kindly look into page number 24. In page number 24, you can see revision 3, invoice and time of supply. What is this concept of time of supply? Listen, whenever a transaction take place, say a transaction take place in a particular month. Say the transaction take place in the month of March. The transaction take place in the month of March 2020. This is the transaction date. The transaction falls in a particular month. For this transaction, we need to find the time of supply. Say, for this transaction, the time of supply falls in April 2020. Then the due date of payment of GST is 20th May 2020. This is the due date of payment of GST. So therefore, in order to determine when we need to pay GST, time of supply plays a major role. And here, the due date of payment of GST is determined based on due date of filing GSTR 3B. So here the assumption is this is the due date of filing GSTR 3B. This is the due date of filing GSTR 3B. So in that assumption, the due date of payment of GST is 20th May. If the due date of filing GSTR 3B gets delayed for any reason, then the due date of payment of GST also will get delayed. But what is the first reason for time of supply in order to determine the due date of payment of GST? Then second reason or second objective of time of supply is to determine the exchange rate. Generally, when transactions are denominated in foreign currency, that can be import or that can be export, and when we need to pay GST, in case of import, we need to pay GST and RCM. In case of export, when it is not an export of service, because we have 5 conditions, right, in order to become export of service. If any one condition do not satisfy, then it will be deemed interstate supply and we need to pay GST. But for that purpose, we need to convert the currency, that is the transaction which is denominated in foreign currency, into Indian rupees. So for that we need exchange rate, and that exchange rate we have discussed in revision 2, that is we need to take CBIC rate or JAP, generally accepted accounting principles rate. In case of goods, CBIC rate; in case of services, JAP rate, prevailing on which date? On the date of time of supply. That is the second objective. Then what is the third objective of time of supply? In order to determine the rate of GSTR. In order to determine the rate of GST. That is between date of supply, date of invoice and date of payment, there could be difference in the rate. But which rate to be taken for the purpose of paying GST? So for that reason, we have time of supply. So what is the objective of time of supply? To determine the due date of payment of GST, to determine the exchange rate, and to determine the rate of GST. Now, this time of supply provisions is given in section 12 in case of goods. Time of supply in case of goods is given in section 12. Time of supply in case of services is given in section 13. And in between these 3 dates, if there is any change in rate, between three dates. Which three dates? Date of supply, date of invoice, and date of payment. If there is any change in rate, then the time of supply will be determined in terms of section 14. So these are the three sections that we have related to time of supply. Section 12, time of supply in case of goods. Section 13, time of supply in case of services. And section 14, time of supply in case of change in rate. Now, this time of supply in turn depends upon the due date of invoice. So time of supply depends upon what? Due date of invoice. Time of supply depends upon due date of invoice. This due date of invoice is given in section 31. This due date of invoice is given in section 31, and now we are proceeding to section 12, 13. Along with that, we are also discussing section 31 due date, because I told you that time of supply and the due date of invoice is interconnected. Don't get confused with due date of payment of GST with due date of invoice. Due date of invoice is required to determine time of supply. Once we get time of supply, that is relevant for determining the due date of payment of GST. So that's the logic between these things. So now I am starting with section 12. So when section 12 is applicable, if it is goods, in that section 12, we are starting with forward charge mechanism. That's the first situation. First situation, forward charge mechanism. So goods covered under forward charge mechanism. Goods which are covered under forward charge mechanism, that is given in section 12 subsection 2. What does it say? The time of supply in case of goods covered under FCM is due date of invoice or actual date of invoice, whichever is earlier. But the date of payment is irrelevant, boss. That is, this date of payment is irrelevant. So it will be either the due date of invoice or actual date of invoice, whichever is earlier. What is the actual date of invoice? The day when I give invoice, that is the actual date of invoice. What is the due date of invoice? It depends upon section 31. And in that, we have general rule and specific rule. As per general provisions, the due date of invoice is if supply involves movement of goods at the time of removal from the factory gate. If supply involves supply involves movement of goods. For example, you are located somewhere in Karnataka and I am in Tamil Nadu, and you placed an order with me and I need to deliver goods to you. So supply involves movement of goods. In case when supply involves movement of goods, what is the due date of invoice? Invoice shall be issued before a time of removal. So the due date is time of removal. Remember, what is the due date of invoice? The time of removal. If supply involves movement of goods. If supply does not involve movement of goods, at the time of delivery. So if supply involves movement of goods, at the time of removal. If supply does not involve movement of goods, what does it mean? Supply does not involve movement of goods. You are coming to my location. I am seller. You are buyer. You are coming to my location and you are purchasing. I am delivering it there. So that itself will be taken as the due date of invoice. Or I may bring the goods to your location. At the time when I am bringing goods to your location, I don't know whether the quantity will be sold or not. Even you don't know whether you will be purchasing or not. So I am bringing the quantity to your location and you purchase it. So once you purchase it, thereafter there is no movement. So supply does not involve movement of goods. So supply involving movement of goods at the time of removal. Supply does not involve movement of goods at the time of delivery. This is the due date of invoice. Then, if there involves a continuous supply of goods. What is continuous supply of goods? There will be successive supply of goods for which the payments will be settled on a periodical basis. Very simple here. That is, in your house, so there is one person who will be putting water like water cans or milk packets or newspaper, and they will be collecting on a periodical basis. That is a continuous supply of goods. And a restaurant which will be continuously buying provisions from a shop, and for which the payments will be settled on a fortnightly basis or monthly basis. So that is known as continuous supply of goods. So what is continuous supply of goods? There will be successive supply of goods for which the payments are settled on a periodical basis. So in that case, what should be taken as the time of supply? As and when the statement of accounts is issued, that is, for every day when the transaction take place, if the settlement is on a monthly basis, so throughout the month, whatever is the purchases that you have made, I will be giving an account statement. And that date or before the date itself, if I have received the payment, so that payment date. But as the case may be, see, usually both will not occur in the same transaction. So there are two models here. Model number one, first what will happen? I will be giving account statement, and based on that you will be making payment. Or first you will be making payment on an ad hoc basis, and thereafter I will give you account statement, and thereafter you will give the balance amount. So therefore, if first I give account statement, and if you give me the money, the date when I give the account statement to you, that should be taken as the due date of invoice. Suppose if it is model 2, wherein you are first giving me the ad hoc payments, and thereafter the settlement happens and the balance amount, if any, will be collected or adjusted, then date of payment received will be taken as the due date of invoice. So this is in case of continuous supply of goods. Invoice shall be issued before at the time each such statement is issued or each payment is received. This is as the case may be. Then next, if it is sale on approval or on return basis. So whenever goods are taken on approval or on return basis, that is, I am selling goods to one person, that is normal. But I am taking goods and delivering it to one person, and only when he accepts the sale is done. Otherwise the sale is not completed. So this is known as sale on approval or on return basis. So when the actual sale takes place here in sale on approval or on return basis, only when the buyer accepts. So that is before at the time of supply. What is that before at the time of supply? Acceptance by buyer. Acceptance by buyer is the time of supply, or 6 months from the date of removal. For that reason, if the buyer accepts 1 year after, then that will not be taken as the time of supply. So therefore, acceptance by the buyer is the supply as and when the actual supply takes place, or 6 months from the date of removal, whichever is earlier. Suppose if he accepts within 6 months, that date will be taken. Suppose if he is accepting after 6 months, the expiry date after 6 months will be taken as the due date of invoice. So therefore, as and when supply takes place, or 6 months from the date of removal, whichever is earlier, will be taken as the due date of invoice. So this is given in section 31 subsection 1, section 31 subsection 4 and section 31 subsection 7. So this information is in section 31 subsection 4, and this information is in section 31 subsection 7, and this too is in section 31 subsection 1. So 3 points we discussed. General rule. What is the due date of invoice? If supply involves movement of goods, at the time of removal. If supply does not involve movement of goods, at the time of delivery. Then specific rule. 31 subsection 4. Continuous supply of goods as and when the statement is issued or the payment is received, as the case may be. And if it is sale on approval or on return basis, as and when the supply takes place, or 6 months from the date of removal, whichever is earlier. These are the due dates of invoice. Or actual date of invoice, whichever is earlier, will be taken as the time of supply. Whether GST is payable on advances in case of goods covered under FCM? No, because date of payment is not one of the date. Therefore, the date of payment is relevant here. So when advance is received, you have to ignore. You need to see when the invoice is issued or when the invoice is supposed to be issued, whichever is earlier. That's it here. Then next. In case of goods covered under reverse charge mechanism, we have to take earlier of the 3 dates. The date on which goods are actually received, or 31st day from the date of invoice, or the date on which payment is made by recipient to the supplier. The date of receipt of goods, or 31st day from the date of invoice. It is like the day immediately succeeding 30 days, so which means the 31st day from the date of invoice and date of receipt of payment. So that should be, that is out of these 3, whichever is earlier should be taken as the time of supply in case of goods covered under RCM. If you observe here, in case of goods covered under FCM, date of payment is ignored. But in case of goods covered under RCM, date of payment is one of the date, which means that whether GST is payable on advances in case of goods covered under RCM, yes, GST is payable on advances in case of goods covered under RCM. That's what I have given as a note. Then look into the next page. Time of supply in case of services covered under FCM. This is given in 13 subsection 2. So far what we have discussed, 12 subsection 2 goods covered under FCM, 12 subsection 3 goods covered under RCM. Now same way, 13 subsection 2 services covered under FCM, And 13 subsection 3, next page, services covered under RCM. Now look into 13 subsection 2. Time of supply in case of services covered under FCM. We need to first check whether invoice is issued within the due date or not. If invoice is issued within the due date, then invoice date or payment date, whichever is earlier. If invoice is issued within due date, invoice date or payment date, whichever is earlier. Which invoice date? Due date of invoice or actual date of invoice? Actual date of invoice. Invoice date or payment date, whichever is earlier. If invoice is not issued within the due date, then completion date, that is date on which service is completed or date on which payment is received, whichever is earlier. So we will see this with the help of an illustration. See here, date of supply with respect to a particular service is 15/1/2020. This is the date of supply. And date of supply or date of completion, anyway you can take this. Whereas date of invoice means due date of invoice or actual date of invoice. Actual date of invoice is on 5/2/2020. And date on which payment is received is 29/2/2020. Now we need to find the time of supply. So we need to find time of supply. First, this is services here. So we need to, services covered under FCM. So we need to check between the date of completion and the date of invoice. Is it within the due date or not? What is the due date? As per general provisions, the due date of invoice is that the invoice should be issued within 30 days from the date of completion. So check whether it is within 30 days or beyond 30 days. It should be within 30 days here. It should be within 30 days. Is it within 30 days or beyond 30 days? It is within 30 days because 15/1/2/52 is within 30 days. Therefore, invoice is issued within due date. So we need to take actual date of invoice. Actual date of invoice or the date of payment, whichever is earlier, that is 5/2/2020 will be taken as the time of supply, and accordingly the due date. What will be the due date of payment of GST? Due date of payment of GST is next month, yeah, that is 23/2020 will be taken as the due date. Now let's take another situation. Suppose if the date of supply is 15/1/2020 and the payment is received before the date of invoice, that is say on 5, say the date of invoice is 15/2/2020 and the date of payment is 5/2/2020. Whether invoice is issued within 30 days or not, we need to check. Whether invoice is issued within 30 days or not, we need to check. Please check whether it is invoice issued within 30 days, 15/1. So in January it is 16 days and in February 15. So therefore it is not within 30 days. So when invoice is not issued within 30 days, we need to take date of completion or date of payment, whichever is earlier. So therefore what will be taken? 15/1/2020. So the due date will be 22/2020. So that will be taken as the due date of payment of GST. So hope you understood. So because invoice is not issued within the due date, so this time of supply got pushed to an earlier date, and accordingly due date got pushed to an earlier date, and if you pay now, you need to pay interest. So that is the disadvantage. So therefore, what is that you have understood out of this illustration? If invoice is issued within due date, then invoice date or payment date, whichever is earlier. Which invoice date? Actual date of invoice. If invoice is not issued within the due date, date of completion or date of payment, whichever is earlier. And what is the due date of invoice? General cases, the due date of invoice is 30 days from the date of completion. Suppose if it is banking and other financial services, If it is banking and other financial services, we need to take it as 45 days. So in the same page, look into that note. Invoice to be issued within 45 days in case of banking and insurance and 30 days in case of others. From which date? From the date of completion. That's a general rule here. Then if it is continuous supply of services, what is continuous supply of service? A service which takes more than 3 months to complete is known as a continuous supply of service. In case of continuous supply of services, we need to determine the due date of invoice in a different manner. First, if due date is ascertainable from the contract or not, we need to check. If due date is ascertainable from the contract, for example, I entered into contract with you to do the construction and it takes 6 months to complete the construction. So is it a continuous supply of services? It is a continuous supply of service. And now what I am doing? First, upon 30% completion, you need to pay me some amount, and upon 60% completion, you need to pay me some amount, and upon 100% completion, you need to pay me the balance amount. So it is like 30% some amount, next 60% some amount, and 100% you need to pay the balance amount. Like that, I am collecting money from you in 3 installments. So now, in this case, when each installment is payable, I am specifying in the contract itself. So which means on or before the date, whatever I have specified will be taken as the due date of invoice. See here, due date ascertainable from the contract, invoice shall be issued on or before the due date of payment. If due date is not ascertainable from the contract, which means that I will not be giving any such due date, but I will be telling that payments will be made in 3 installments. As and when I receive the installment, to that extent I need to give the invoice. Invoice shall be issued before the time supplier receives the payment. Suppose if the payment of installment is linked to completion of an event, like 30% completion, 60%, 100% completion, as and when 30% is completed, so I need to give invoice to the extent of that 30%, and I need to give invoice to the extent of 60%, like that. So invoice should be issued on or before the completion of that event. This is in case of continuous supply of services. Then cessation of services. So whenever there is a cessation of service, that is stoppage of services here. That is, I am rendering service and abruptly the service got stopped. Say for example, the current scenario. So whenever there is a sudden stoppage of services, in that case, to the extent what I have rendered services, I may have right to retain. To the extent what I have rendered services, I may have right to retain. So I will give you one example related to this. So what happened, I announced a batch, crash batch, and for which some students have attended. And they attended for 3 days. And after 3 days, so this complete lockdown has happened. So from thereafter, no classes were continued. And that lockdown is continuing. So therefore, not in a position to take the classes. Now, that institution might be retaining the fees with respect to 3 days and remaining amount will be refundable. Now, say for example, for the 3 days, 500 rupees is retained out of 2000 rupees and balance 1500 is refundable. Now, 500 is retained for that 500, immediately upon cessation, the invoice should be issued here. That is, cessation of service, invoice shall be issued when such supply ceases with respect to the proportionate amount. This is the due date of invoice in case of 3 situations. For goods we have 3 situations and for services we have 3 situations. Accordingly, we determine the due date of invoice. Now what you need to check, whether invoice is issued within the due date or not. If invoice is issued within the due date, invoice date or payment date, whichever is earlier. If invoice not issued within due date, completion date or payment date, whichever is earlier. Now in the case of services, whether GST is payable on advances, yes, because date of payment is one of the date. Therefore, GST is payable on advances in case of services covered under forward charge mechanism. Listen, GST being an accrual mechanism of payment of GST, like a payment of tax, therefore, on advances, GST is always payable. The exception is only in case of goods covered under a forward charge mechanism. Then, look into time of supply in case of services covered under RCM. See, in case of goods covered under RCM, what is that? We have seen 3 dates. The date on which goods are received and 31st day from the date of invoice, or the date on which payment is made by recipient to supplier, whichever is earlier. Whereas in case of services, which is covered under RCM, we need to take first date is not there. That is the date of receipt of services we don't have. Instead of 31st date, you need to replace it with 61st day. 61st day from the date of invoice or the date on which payment is made to supplier, whichever is earlier. Only 2 dates. Then whether GST is payable on advances in case of services covered under RCM, yes, because date of payment is one of the date. Then we have time of supply in special situations. So what we have discussed is subsection 2 and subsection 3 in both sections 12 and 13. First try to understand the bird's eye view. So section 12 deals with time of supply in case of goods. And section 13 deals with time of supply in case of services. In that subsection 1, that is the due date of payment of GST is determined in terms of section 12 and section 13. Then subsection 2, in both places subsection 2 is FCM and in both places subsection 3 is RCM. And whether we have same provision or different provision between goods and services, different provision. Now we are discussing subsection 4, subsection 5 and subsection 6, which is same with respect to both goods and services. Now we are starting with 12 subsection 4 and 13 subsection 4, time of supply in case of vouchers.